you've done a study on cocaine and sexual decision making. Can
Yeah,
you
that was
explain? Can you explain the findings? I mean, in a broad sense, how do you do a study that involves cocaine? And the other, how do you do a study involving this sexual decision making? And then how do you do a study that combines both?
yeah, sex and drugs too. I'm just missing the rock and
The
roll.
rock
It's
and
like
roll.
the two controversial. Rock and roll isn't very controversial
Yeah.
anymore, but yeah. So the cocaine, lots of hoops to jump through. You got to have a lot of medical support. You got to be basically at an institution, a research unit like I'm at that has a long history, and the ability to do that. And you get ethics approval, get FDA approval, but it's possible. And whenever you're dealing with something like cocaine, you would never want to give that to a not someone who hasn't already used cocaine, and you want to make sure you're not giving it to someone who's an active user who wants to quit. So the idea is like, okay, if you're using this type of drug anyway, and we're really sure you're not looking to quit, hey, use a couple times in the lab with us so we can at least learn something. And part of what we learn is maybe to help people not use and reduce the harms of cocaine. So there's hoops to jump through. With the sexual decision making, the main thing I looked at was this model of, I applied delayed discounting to what we talked about earlier, the now versus later, that kind of decision making that goes along with addiction. I applied that to condom use decisions. And I've probably published about 20 or so papers with this in different drugs. And
So the primary metric is whether you do or don't use a condom. That's the
right. All hypothetical. And so this is using hypothetical decision making, but I've published
okay.
some studies looking at showing a tight correspondence to self-reported in correlational studies to self-reported behavior.
So this is like how did you do a questionnaire kind of thing?
Right. So it's not quite a questionnaire, but it's a behavioral task requiring them to respond to. So you show pictures of a bunch of individuals, and it's kind of like one of these fun behavioral. Like, in a lot of them, you get like numbers are boring, but it's like, okay, hot or not? Like, which of these 60 people would you have a one night stand with? Men, women. So pick whatever you like. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, whatever you're into. It's all variety there. Out of that group, you pick some subsets of people. Who do you think is the one you most want to have sex with the least? Who you think's most likely to have an STI, or least likely a sexually transmitted disease by STI? And then you could do certain decision making questions. So what I've done is asked, say this person, you read a vignette, this person wants to have sex with you, now you've met them, you get along. Casual sex scenario, like a one night stand. A condom's available, just rate your likelihood from 1 to 100 on this kind of scale of, would you use it?
Would you use a condom?
But then you can change your scenario to say, okay, now imagine you have to wait 5 minutes to use a condom. So the choice is now, instead of using condom versus not, in terms of your likelihood scale, it ranges from have sex now without a condom versus on the other end of the scale is wait 5 minutes to have sex with a condom. So you rate your likelihood of where your behavior would be along that continuum. And then you could say, okay, well, what about an hour? What about 3 hours? What about 24
Wait,
hours?
so I'm misunderstanding. Now without a condom or 5 minutes later with a condom,
right?
So what? What's supposed to be the preference for the person? Like there's a lot of factors coming into play, right? There's
right.
There's pleasure and personal preference, and then there's also the safety. Those are two, are those competing objectives?
Right. And so we do get at that through some individual measures. And this task is more of a face valid task where there's a lot underneath the hood. So for most people, sex with the condom is the better reward. But underneath the hood of that is just at the purely physical level, they'd rather have sex without the condom. It's going to feel better.
What do you mean by reward? Like when they calculate their trajectory through life and try to optimize it, then sex with a condom is a good idea?
Well, it's really based on. I mean, yeah. Presumably that's the case. That there's. But it's measured by what would really that first question where there is no delay. most people say they would be at the higher end of that scale. A lot of times, 100%, they said they would definitely use
a condom.
A condom. Not everybody, and we know that's the case. It's like that some people don't like condoms. Some people say, yeah, I want to use a condom, but a quarter of the time ended up not, because I just get lost in the passion of the moment. So for the people, I mean, the only reason that people, so behaviorally speaking, at least for a large number of people in many circumstances, condom use is a reinforcer just because people do it. Like,
right.
Why are they doing it? They're not because it makes the sex feel better, but because it allows for at least the same general reward, even if it feels a little bit not as good, with the condom. Nonetheless, they get most of the benefit without the concurrent, oh my gosh, there's this risk of
STI.
either unwanted pregnancy or getting HIV, or way more likely than HIV, herpes, genital warts, etc., all the lovely ones. And we've actually done research saying, like, where we gauge the probability of these individual different STIs, and it's like, what's the heavy hitter in terms of what people are using to judge, to evaluate whether they're going to use a condom.
So that's why the condom use is the delayed thing, 5 minutes or more. And then, because
which would normally be the larger later reward, like the $10 versus the $9. It's like the $10, which is counterintuitive if you just think about the physical pleasure.
So that's a good a good thing to measure. So condom use is a really good concrete, quantifiable thing that you can use in a study, and then you can add a lot of different elements, like the presence of cocaine and so on.
Yeah, you can get people loaded on like any number of drugs, like cocaine, alcohol, and methamphetamine are the 3 that I've done and published on. And it's interesting that
these are fun studies, man.
Right. I love to get people loaded in a safe context, and but to really, it started like there was some early research with alcohol. I mean, the psychedelics are the most interesting, but it's like all of these drugs are fascinating. The fact that all of these are keys that unlock a certain like psychological experience in the head.